You can subscribe to The Spectator for 12 weeks for only £12 for our print and online editions, plus get 6 months of digital access free to The Telegraph. Go to spectator.co.uk/telegraph.
Hello and welcome to Spectator Out Loud, the podcast from The Spectator where we pick a few of our writers each week to get them to read their pieces out for you. This week we'll be joined by comedian Griff Rhys Jones, who talks about how London has become a war zone for motorists. Also on the episode this week, Toby Young on why he's become an English nationalist, and at the very end, Cosmo Landesman on the joys of drinking alone. First, Griff Rhys Jones.
Late one evening, in Yangon in Myanmar a few years ago, I noticed a grey Morris Minor van patrolling the streets. It had an old-fashioned double-ended trumpet loudspeaker on its roof, blaring out an amplified voice. "What's it saying?" I asked my guide. "It tells the people it's late, stop drinking and go to bed. You have a busy day tomorrow," she told me. That's the spirit. We should get some of that in London. Stop eating, get on your bikes, pedal faster. Why has COVID brought out a rash of virtuous bullying? I've lost count of the number of times that Radio 4 has asserted that this plague will create a better, more caring, more aware, lovelier human race. And if not, we can, of course, be ordered to be so. Now, in the middle of calamity, as we try to save a faltering economy, halt the return of a deadly pandemic and resume normality, Transport for London, TfL, in league with earnest local councillors and encouraged by the government, have decided to take this moment to force Londoners to adopt a more worthy form of personal transport. They've arbitrarily closed off Park Lane, Euston Road, the Edgware Road, and hundreds of other main arteries. Their world-leading street space for London will stop rat runs and make London areas access only. How? These are the main roads. You may love all this if you're fit and 20. The elderly think it's bonkers. Ordinary working people with jobs and cars are simply confused. I'm not anti-bike. I love them. I loved mine so much that in the early 1970s I was just about the only bloke on a bicycle in central London, or so it felt. I used to haul it into the back of a black cab, particularly if I was a little drunk and unwilling to face the backwind of articulated trucks in a rainstorm. Bikes are more popular now, but they're still a limited enthusiasm. These days, however, minority zeal is our master. Mount up, Buster, you're either with us or you are with us. On Not the 9 O'Clock News 40 years ago, Mel Smith played a man on a phone doodling on an envelope. Hanging up, he handed the squiggles over as the new one-way system for Basildon. This comic creation is now at work at TfL, putting in bicycle lanes that end abruptly and arbitrarily and closing roads everywhere with planters, modal filters, Copenhagen crossings and experimental traffic orders. In May, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and TfL launched this bold new street space plan to rapidly transform London streets to accommodate a possible 10-fold increase in cycling and 5-fold increase in walking when lockdown restrictions are eased. They have reduced the real traffic to a long, honking, choked pipe of polluting fumes, while cyclists weave in and out, scrupulously avoiding the new lanes. I rarely drive in London. I live in the middle of all this and walk everywhere. But the other week, I got into my mobile Hazchem sealed unit, my car, and I ventured out into the extraordinary new setup along the Euston Road. I confronted vast pavement spaces to enable the non-existent central London workforce to keep yards apart on their way to those packed basement restaurants and pubs, and a lane to facilitate an imaginary horde of new bikes, with another carriageway taken over to allow the occasional vacant bus to belch past. Every construction vehicle, van, and rig in London was now creeping along a narrow gut, spewing out particulate matter. Even if there was a tenfold increase in cycling, which there wasn't, central London is already over-provided with lanes. How do I know this? Because the crazy golf shoots are generally empty. Why? First, because the lanes jump around all over the place. They disgorge the law-abiding into dangerous intersections. And secondly, you can't overtake. Everybody knows that half the cyclists in London think they're in a race. Bicycle accidents increased by 57% after the introduction of the Tavistock-Torrington Place lane. Every sane cyclist already uses the back roads for their daily commute. Motorised traffic won't diminish. It will head for these back roads too, exactly as I did. It may not mount the pavements and zip up one-way streets like any self-respecting bicycle boy, but it will pollute the very places where central Londoners live. We only have a rush hour because central London councils want one. A good proportion of their housing remains workplace, stuffed with commuting lawyers and accountants. They've used Article 4 directions to prevent anyone turning it back into dwellings. The windfall from business rates means that they prefer old-fashioned zoning. The most effective planet-saving reforms will be to prevent commercial centres and to spread live-work across the entirety of London. Instead, we are once again pursuing outmoded and outdated visions, or fantasies, as London-wide protests by ordinary working people are calling them. Our capital is a success because people inhabit it. There is no commercial ghetto rotting away, as in so many other British cities. People live right by the largest shopping centres. A few years ago, Khan wanted to pedestrianise Oxford Street. If that had happened, every diesel-powered vehicle that rumbles along it would have gone to pump out its fumes into the back streets where children sleep. He was thwarted by the Marylebone Association, who went to the voters on this single issue. So, if Londoners want to get rid of those who think that a pandemic gives them an excuse to reorder their 10 square miles of local borough and save the entire planet, then elect them out. Most of them are hanging on by less than 100 votes. But don't blame the mayor alone for this failed scheme. After spending oodles of cash, he's now decided to open the Euston Road again. It was all just an experiment. Nobody wanted to bike in his new lane. Never mind, his cause has been embraced by local councils. The Gray's Inn Road is next up for works.
That was Griff Rhys Jones. And now, Toby Young.
One of the things I hadn't anticipated about the pandemic is that it would turn me into an English nationalist. At the time of writing, the governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have decided to place their countries under various forms of lockdown, while Number 10 has stopped short of imposing one on England with some Tier 3 hotspots. The explanation for this divergence is simple. The Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish executives don't need to worry about the economic harm the lockdowns will cause because they know that Westminster will come to their rescue. Boris, by contrast, can't afford to be so reckless because England has no equivalent sugar daddy. The devolved nations are acting like irresponsible students, running up massive debts on their credit cards because they can count on the bank of mum and dad to bail them out. Actually, it's even worse than that in Scotland's case, because one of Nicola Sturgeon's reasons for placing so much of the country under virtual house arrest is to whip up nationalist sentiment. She wants to position herself as a responsible grown-up, doing what's necessary to keep her people safe, in contrast to the bumbling buffoon in Westminster. Not only will that help the SNP in the forthcoming elections to the Scottish Parliament, it will also make a nationalist victory more likely in the inevitable second referendum. The irony, of course, is that if the SNP had won the first referendum, Sturgeon wouldn't be able to indulge in this ruinously expensive virtue signalling. With independence would have come a modicum of fiscal responsibility, one of the better arguments for granting the free-spending nationalists their wish. The actions of Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford are scarcely any more explicable. His decision had nothing to do with rising case numbers, hospital admissions or deaths. Daily cases by specimen date plateaued in Wales last week, as have the number of COVID-19 patients in critical care. Daily deaths from COVID peaked at 11 on the 7th of October and haven't climbed above single digits since. The cumulative death toll in Wales is 1,722, which is about 4% of the total in England. No, the reason the Welsh Labour leader has imposed these draconian restrictions is to ratchet up the pressure on Boris and make it more difficult for him to avoid imposing a 2-week circuit breaker, thereby enhancing the standing of Keir Starmer, who called for one last week. Drakeford can afford to play politics with his own people's livelihoods because he knows that Boris, the man he's doing his best to embarrass, will have to pick up the pieces. All of which has left me feeling like an angry, red-faced gammon. Up until now, I haven't minded subsidising our lower-income neighbours, even though they've never exhibited the slightest flicker of gratitude. I know from my involvement with various good causes that the beneficiaries of charitable giving often resent their dependence on you. You do it because it's the right thing to do, not because you want them to doff their caps in appreciation. But for the devolved nations to take our money and then use it to finance a campaign to make England look selfish and irresponsible has pushed me over the edge. It's one thing to be resented by the people you're supporting financially, but for them to be self-righteously looking down their noses at you as they sweep your money into their pockets is a bit much. It's like being the parent of 3 teenagers who are permanently stuck in the sanctimonious holier-than-thou phase. I haven't quite given up on unionism. I still think we're better off together, and I worry what will become of Scotland and Wales if we were to part. So I think we should give them a choice. We hold referendums in all 3 devolved nations and say, look, devolution's not working. The English can't continue bankrolling you if you're just going to set fire to the money in a misguided effort to make yourselves look better than us. Either you abandon this sophomoric pretense of independence and throw in your lot with us, or you become separate sovereign states entirely responsible for your own affairs. I hope they choose to remain in the UK. I really do. But if they embrace full independence, that would be better than this unworkable halfway house.
That was Toby Young. And finally, Cosmo Landesman.
Thanks to a combination of nighttime curfews, social distancing rules, pubs closing, restaurants failing, the rule of 6, and compulsory mask wearing, that basic and necessary human need for people to meet for a drink has never been so difficult. Now, with the government's new 3-tier COVID strategy in place, anyone at any moment could find that their local pubs shut, their parties cancelled, and all forms of indoor mixing prohibited. Millions in the UK are already living under these restrictions. It's a fair bet that millions more will soon join them. And if the government gives in to demands for a circuit breaker, a short-term lockdown, it would in effect totally suspend social drinking as we know it. In the wake of these restrictions, a disgruntled friend of mine spoke for many when he said to me, "What the hell are we supposed to do? Drink on our own?" "Yes, you should try it," I said. When I told him that I discovered during the first lockdown back in March that solitary drinking, contrary to popular thinking, is one of life's great pleasures, he looked concerned and said, "Are you okay? Want to talk about anything?" We solitary drinkers, we prefer to be called solo drinkers, have always been stigmatized. Drinking on your own is seen by the medical profession as a sign of such mental health problems as depression and alcoholism. And the public at large regards solo drinking with suspicion, particularly when it comes to men. It's what sad, lonely men do. Sad men in smelly rooms. Sad, sloshed men watching porn and drinking cheap wine. Sad, lonely, depressed men sending tweets they will regret in the morning. Sad men who weep themselves to sleep. But nothing could be further from the truth, at least for me. I can just sit with a nice cold martini and Sinatra in the background and just chill. No noisy pub with poor service, no smoky parties where you can never find a drink, and there's none of that bullying talk of, "Go on, have another one, don't be so boring." Plus, you don't have to try and make clever, amusing chit-chat for other people. I don't like to drink in public because I get drunk so easily. I always wanted to be a tough, hard-drinking journo like Mailer or Hemingway, but when it comes to booze, I'm a Bambi. I just have one baby sham and I'm blotto. 2 drinks and I'm over the moon and under the table. 3 and I'm under the hostess. So I'll do my drinking on my own, thanks. Solo drinking has its practical advantages as well. It's much cheaper drinking on your own because you don't have to buy endless rounds of drinks. And at the end of the evening, you don't have to get that expensive cab home because you can just pass out on your sofa. Perfect. And best of all, the only drunken bore you have to suffer as a solo drinker is yourself. So man up and drink up on your own, that is. You'll feel liberated from that dependence on needing other people around to enjoy a drink. After all, you can enjoy listening to music on your own or eating a good meal on your own, so why not drinking on your own? Cheers.
That was Cosmo Landesman. Thanks for listening to this episode of Spectator Out Loud, and do join us again next week.